Welcome everybody out there in ASHA webinar land. I'm Perry Flynn, and I'm the consultant to the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction in the area of speech-language pathology and a professor at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And I'm on ASHA's board of directors. It's important that I disclose that I am being paid for this, and I am a member of ASHA's board of directors. So today we're going to talk about connecting speech and language goals to the Common Core state standards. And you should have a handout there that you can follow along with my presentation using your handout. And I think you also have a case study that we will use at the very end. I'd like to acknowledge the work of my friends Judy Rudebush and Lissa Power-DeFure. The three of us have really contributed all of the content to this presentation, so I want to acknowledge those two people, and you'll find several references at the end of the presentation that talk about their work, and so I'm happy to present this on sort of all of our behalves. So we can move on. The Common Core State Standards offer lots of opportunities for speech-language pathologists because there's a track that is all of our stuff. It is the English Language Arts curriculum and the speaking and listening standards in particular. So your first slide there is some of those standards, and I thought I might read one or two to you. So the second bullet there is students will come to discussions prepared, having read or studied required material, explicitly drawing on that preparation and other information known about the topic, and explore ideas under discussion. So you can see from that standard and the rest of them on this particular page that our stuff is all over the Common Core State Standards. And I would also encourage you to not just look at the English Language Arts curriculum or the speaking and listening section, but also to look at math. We're going to look at a couple math goals in a minute. Science and social studies. Actually, for me, when I was doing therapy, the science and social studies curricula really offered more opportunity for me to tie my services to what was going on in classrooms. So I'd encourage you to check out those curricula. But for writing goals, like we are going to talk about today, the listening and speaking standards offer many opportunities and really inform what we do as speech-language pathologists and tell us what the expectations of the classroom and curriculum are. I think that the Common Core offers a great opportunity for us to tie our services to what kids are doing in the classroom, and so then to write goals that demonstrate that demonstrate our tie to the standards. So let's continue to look at some things for particularly students with disabilities. So in the next slide, you'll see I talk about dynamic learning maps. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you will see the Common Core State Standards. And on the right-hand side, you will see the dynamic learning map standards that are for kids with intellectual disabilities. And you'll probably see that the dynamic learning maps sort of synthesize the standard, the Common Core State Standard, down to its very most rudimentary elements, most essential elements. And so if you're working with kids with intellectual disabilities, the dynamic learning maps are a great thing for you to use. And you can go on to the next slide. Your state has either chosen to use dynamic learning maps or the next slide, the National Center for State Collaborative extensions of the Common Core. So figure out what state or what standards your state has adopted for extensions to the Common Core. The National Center for State Collaborative standards on this slide are on the right. And I think that those standards even synthesize the Common Core State Standards down to an even more elementary level than the dynamic learning maps do. So you might really consider these things for your students with the greatest intellectual disabilities. And these standards are ways to tie our goals and IEPs to what is expected for these kids with intellectual disabilities. So really have a look at those. Lots of people do not know about the extended content standards, and so check those out. The references for them are on the final slide, so you'll have have the URL to get to both of those sets of standards. So as I said a little bit earlier, don't leave out math and technology. There are lots of opportunities for us in math, and you see this goal right here that students will solve two-step word problems using the 4 operations of addition, multiplication, subtraction, and division. So right there, solving two-step problems and knowing what the 4 operations are, those are opportunities for us to teach things too. And students will represent these problems using equations and a letter stating the unknown quantity. So you'll see that there are lots of opportunities for us in math. I tied my services to science and social studies in classrooms most of the time, and I understood how I could do that, but I'm terrible at math. And so a real challenge for me was to tie my services to an Algebra 1 class. And so this classroom was for students with learning disabilities, and they had a great teacher who I collaborated with well, and there was just a ton of things that I could connect with in those Algebra 1 equations. So that worked out to be a great collaboration for somebody who probably is LD in math like myself. So if I could do it, I think you can do it too. So moving on from math, this is Bloom's taxonomy. And if you examine the standards, you'll find that Bloom's taxonomy is all over them. Bloom's taxonomy represents higher levels of comprehension. At the very lowest level are the WH questions. And so speech pathologists, I think, are really good at asking WH questions, but sometimes we don't move on past WH questions. And so the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy here that you see represent the higher levels of comprehension that I hope that you'll consider using for kids. So don't get stuck at the WH level. Even if students are unable to comprehend questions at the WH level, doesn't necessarily mean that they won't be better comprehenders at other levels that might have some more concrete things for them to tie to. So I'm going to sort of talk you through some ideas as we move up the complexity levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So the second level is the understanding level. Can kids classify, describe, discuss, explain, so on, translate, and paraphrase? So something that I did with kids a lot was I had their science and social studies textbooks, and I used those to have them paraphrase, to either listen to me reading those texts and take one note that summarized the entire paragraph, or for reading comprehension tasks, have them read it and have them summarize that. So there's an activity for you too, and I think you can see what kinds of goals you might write for those kinds of activities that you would serve kids. So the next level up is the applying level. Can students choose, demonstrate, dramatize, and so on? So I was at a school with 2 speech pathologists. It was a huge school, and I was not very successful at dramatizing things. My counterpart at that school was really good at using dramatization to help kids get content information. So if that works for you, that's great. It did not work for me. So the next level up is analyzing. Can students appraise, compare, contrast, do experiments? So my example for you here is at 7th and 8th grade, I had all of my kids do experiments, and one student in particular who was not a motivated learner was really interested in oil spills. One of the oil tankers had just had a spill, and he was really interested in what was going on with that. So his science experiment was to see what sopped up an oil spill best: Dawn dishwashing liquid, straw, packing peanuts, cotton, a variety of things. And his experiment ended up winning the science fair that year. So that was a really meaningful task on a higher comprehension level for that student. The next level is evaluating. Can students appraise, argue, defend, judge, and so on? So my example for you here is I worked in a classroom, a 9th grade classroom for social studies. And a couple times during the year, we had those kids do like a quiz bowl where we arranged their desks side by side. They had a buzzer that they could buzz in, and we sort of pre-taught for them several topics that they would have to argue back and forth. It was very motivating. They were very interested in, first of all, not looking foolish in front of their friends, and second of all, they wanted to win the argument. So they really did prepare well for the arguments and argued back and forth very effectively. So you might think about that. Even little kids can do that, argue a point back and forth about something fairly simple or elementary. And finally, at the creating level, the highest level of comprehension in Bloom's taxonomy, students can assemble, construct, design, formulate, write, change information they have into something new. And my example for you here is, again, in that same social studies class, we talked about the Bill of Rights. And so the students in the class wrote their own Bill of Rights for us to give to the principal. And they did things like they had 5 minutes to walk between classes, and they asked for 7 minutes, and they also asked to go off campus for lunch, which they weren't able to do at that time. So they wrote their Bill of Rights. We edited it really well. Sort of trick for you is if you get a paper bag from the grocery store and wet it and crumple it up, it looks like parchment paper. And I burnt the edges of it and then allowed them to get quill pens. We got quill pens with ink, and they got to write their Bill of Rights on the parchment paper that I'd burnt the edges of, and we gave that to the principal. I'm not sure that he completely appreciated that, but it was a great activity for the kids. They were really motivated. They worked in cooperative groups, did a lot of editing. I think you can see all kinds of speech and language opportunities in that activity to tie our goals to the Common Core. So, moving on, how to write quality IEPs. So, quality IEPs start with a good assessment, and I would encourage you to be an assessment investigator rather than a diagnostic technician. Diagnostic technicians just give a bunch of standardized tests and sort of report those results. But good assessment investigators, like the little person on your handout, really collect other kinds of information, like they do observations of students. They collect samples of work that already exist, like written language samples already exist in students' folders, and teachers can get that information to you. And those kinds of things represent really good assessment information that are going to help you write educationally relevant goals. So I would encourage you to spend some time writing a really good present level of academic achievement and functional performance. That present level really drives the entire rest of the IEP. If it is well written and comprehensive, that talks about the student's strengths and areas of need, it's going to help drive the goals, the service delivery, the accommodations and modifications. So I would encourage you on that IEP to spend some time with a really good present level of performance. Consider the frequency and duration of your services, in other words, the dosage. There are many more options than once a week or twice a week for a half an hour. And so I would encourage you to think about all those different kinds of things. Lots of people these days are doing sort of burst or blast therapy, where they're pulling kids out for a brief period of time, 5 or 10 minutes, getting many responses, and then returning them to the classroom really quickly. So that's a different kind of service delivery than we've used in the past traditionally, and it's getting lots of support, and people are really feeling good about it. So I would encourage you to give that a shot, and you represent that on the IEP just like it sounds. If you're doing it by the week, 5 10-minute sessions per week. So think about that. Least restrictive environment is as much with or without typical peers as it is a place. It implies a place because it says the word environment. But if you're serving kids even in a classroom, but in the back of the classroom without their typical peers, that's a very restrictive environment, actually. So think about supplemental aids and supports as you write your IEPs. Sometimes those can be very important, particularly for maybe augmented communication users. Really consider the transition plan for these kids as well. Transition services that speech pathologists, occupational therapists, or physical therapists provide can really make or break kids' success. So really thoughtfully consider that. Sometimes I think we just go through the motions at the transition plan. And then writing reasonable goals that are reasonable to accomplish in the IEP period. Sometimes parents and even teachers encourage you to write 17 speech goals or something like that. And that is not reasonable to accomplish in an IEP period, which is typically a year. So really consider what is possible to accomplish and write goals that are truly attainable in the course of a year. So I'm going to talk you through real quickly the 7 steps that Judy Rudebush suggests in tying our services to the Common Core standards. So talk to teachers. Teachers can tell you what standards the kids can or cannot do, and you might capitalize on the standards that they are able to accomplish the things that they can't. Review the standards from previous grade levels as well, because we as speech pathologists operate from a developmental perspective, and we know that those kids are never going to accomplish 3rd grade goals, for example, if they're in 3rd grade, if they have not achieved the things that come in kindergarten or 1st grade yet. So you may need to look back a grade level or 2 to find goals that kids need to accomplish. So then review the standards from our special speech pathology lens. What are the underlying syntactic, semantic, phonologic, morphologic, and Bloom's taxonomy functions that kids need to accomplish that goal? And you are probably the only one who can analyze goals in that way. So really look at the goals from all of those different perspectives. Most of the goals will be really clear that one of those areas is the focus, but really it takes all of those areas tied together to accomplish any of the goals. So you might be the person who really is able to tease out that they are not being successful on a goal, perhaps because of the pragmatic expectations of that goal or the semantic expectations. That's a really important thing, to consider the goals through the lens of the speech-language pathologist. So here are some goals, again, in the area of collaboration and comprehension. I don't think I'll read them to you. You can read them and you'll clearly see our role in them. The second part of Judy's 7 steps is to examine the data. I talked earlier about the many forms of data that the assessment investigator is collecting, like observations, written language samples, doing dynamic assessment. Dynamic assessment is test, teach, test, teach. It's what stimulability testing is. So don't leave that out of your arsenal. You can do stimulability testing over many days, and most of your states have a 60-day timeline before referral to determination of eligibility. So use your 60 days to do some dynamic assessment and see if you can make a difference for kids in that short period of time there, that has implications for whether you'll place them in the first place, and then what kind of goals and the prognosis that you'll expect as well. Dynamic assessment gives you all of that kind of information. So you might have other things too. The last bullet on this page asks you to consider what other kinds of things you are doing that that aren't just standardized tests. So really think about that, and think about using a wider arsenal of assessments to really get a good, educationally relevant picture of where kids are. So step 3 is to determine the student's present level of performance. And earlier in a slide, I encouraged you to write a really good quality, exhaustive present level that talks about their strengths as well as their areas of need. The strengths are really important for you to capitalize on to serve their areas of need. So really think about that. Using multiple forms of current data. So then developing measurable annual goals that are aligned with the Common Core State Standards. It's not appropriate to simply copy the standards into your IEP because the standards represent regular education. And if we are just working towards the regular education goals, that implies that students do not need special education. So it's not ever appropriate to just copy the goals, but to analyze the goals by our lens, as I talked about before, and figure out what the required components are that we serve. So I talked about consulting teachers before. That's so important. They can give you lots of information. Tying our goals to the standards gives us an opportunity to have conversations with teachers and learn more about curriculum. They can learn a little bit about differentiated instruction from us. It's a great springboard for collaboration with teachers. So really think about using that. Well-written goals, of course, have these components to well-written conditions, the behaviors that you expect of the student, and then the criteria for mastery. So make sure that you include those in your well-written goals too, of course. So then progress assessment, progress monitoring are the big sort of buzzwords these days. So at the time of progress reports is a great opportunity to again connect with teachers and see if students are using the goals, using the skills that you teach in their classrooms. So really think about doing that. Dynamic assessment, again, is a way to gauge progress. Collaboration with teachers. If you're in teachers' classrooms and collaborating with them on a regular basis, you share responsibility for accomplishing those goals. You share responsibility for dismissal. You share responsibility for writing IEPs when the new IEP comes up. So I would really encourage you to begin to establish stronger relationships with teachers as you tie your goals to the Common Core State Standards. So then the way that you'll really be able to see if kids are making progress is if they are making progress in the classroom. And teachers can tell you that. And again, those educationally relevant, authentic assessment pieces of information that come from the classroom are the things that you're really going to need to assess how kids are doing. So really think about collecting all that information as well. So then, identifying special education, special instruction, that's a hard thing that many people are struggling with these days. What constitutes differentiated instruction? So perhaps providing visual supports for kids, visual cues, a different dosage of the information or special education, removal from regular education settings. All those things might be what constitutes differentiated instruction, but thinking about that question is another opportunity to connect with teachers, for you to help them differentiate instruction in their classroom and you doing that wherever you're serving kids. So think about accommodations and modifications for kids too. Again, talk to teachers, include that in your IEPs. So the 7th step of Judy's 7-step method is how will we measure progress? And I think it's wise to talk to the IEP team at the time of the IEP about how we will do that. I think typically speech-language pathologists have operated in a very siloed way. We have just taken the kids away to our secret speech room and done our magical therapy and collected data however we saw. But if you're really wanting to tie our services to classroom and the Common Core standards, other people may have to keep data for you too to see if what we are doing is making a difference for kids. You might have to come up with a system that teachers can use, teachers' assistants can use, you can use, even the students can use to keep track of their own data. So I think a very important person who we often leave out of data collection is the student themselves. Students can collect their own data, and we have information that suggests that that is very motivating to kids if they do collect their own data. And there's some very simple ways. I had colored pens that had like sparkles in them, and kids loved to use those colored pens with 3x5 cards to do the strikes and circles to collect their own data. Just the simplest things like dropping a penny in a bowl of water was very motivating to them. Every time they did a response correct, they got to do that. Kids can draw pie charts and bar graphs these days on the iPad that, again, is crazy motivating to them. So think about ways to include your students in collecting their own data really for every area of disorder that we serve. It's very motivating and really helps bring the point across to them about the progress that they are making. Making sure that the standards-based IEPs that hopefully now you will begin writing are really curriculum relevant. And they are if you're tying your skills to the Common Core standards. Think about the grade levels. I talked about before, you might have to go back a grade level to really find the standards where the kids are functioning right now. Focus on the students' disability as it negatively impacts their performance in the classroom. We are not in schools to just fix R's or get kids to say beside or under. We are there to get them to do that so they meet the standards of the Common Core. That is our function in schools, to get kids to excel in the general education curriculum. So be sure that you're really focusing on that as our goal. And then, as we said, you may need to really focus on the grade level stuff, and teachers can help you to do that. They will know what kids can and cannot do on grade level. So it's time for you to try an example there at home. I'm going to read a case study for you really quickly, or just the highlights of it, and then I have the standards that I think this case study is going to impact. And then what I'd like you to do is write a goal that you think ties the standards that I'm going to read for you to the disability that the student has, which is a fluency disability. And my friend Rob Dellinger in the Wake County Schools provided me with this case study, and so I appreciate that. So this is a kindergarten student who exhibited all these different kinds of fluency disorders. He had some pauses, some facial grimaces that represented secondaries, some eyebrow movements, some blinks. He verbalized that he felt some negative feelings about responding in class, and so he didn't want to do that. So you can see that he had a fluency disorder, and it was negatively impacting his ability to succeed in that classroom for a variety of reasons, and he was not wanting to respond, so that certainly would impact him. So these are the goals that Rob and I selected out that we feel like the student would have a difficult time with. This was a kindergarten student. And so you can read through those goals. These are from the Common Core, and see how you think the case study that we just talked about would have a difficult time mastering these goals. And finally, I wrote a goal for you that the student would use his fluency strategies of easy onset and slowed rate to answer 2 WH questions in a classroom period of time for about a half an hour with no stuttering events. And that's probably a pretty gutsy goal for this particular student given the IEP period 1 year, but depending upon perhaps some trial therapy that you did with him through dynamic assessment, you might find that he was very influenced by the strategies that were taught even in a short amount of time. So maybe you're finding that his prognosis would be good, and perhaps this would be a reasonable goal to accomplish in that period. So the next slide is the reference list, and I hope this has been helpful for you in tying IEP goals that you write to the Common Core state standards. And so good luck, and thanks again for this opportunity to talk to you.